All right, so I'll just follow on kind of from what Liz was talking about. You've got a really good background about ecology and conservation, so I won't repeat any of that. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my PhD research, which I just finished with the support of the Glossy Black Conservancy. And I work in the space of bioacoustics. So I basically have been developing ways to monitor glossies and red-tailed black cockatoos just using sound. So totally non-invasive and just basically asking the questions like, what type of data can we collect? Is it even a good method? And punchline, I think it's a really great method. Ben thinks it's a good method, hence why they've purchased some sound recorders, which you'll all get to have a look at in a little bit. Yes, that works. All right, I won't go over all of this. So there are 5 species of black cockatoos in Australia, as Liz said, 3 subspecies of glossies, and most of my work was down here on Kangaroo Island. As Liz said, that's endangered, nationally endangered subspecies, and as many of you would be aware, they were really smashed in the bushfires over summer. Happy to talk at length about that. We've been doing work on the impacts of the fire. We've got some new publications about to come out about that, but I won't talk about that for now. This is this photo here. I took this actually in the front yard of the house where I was staying on Kangaroo Island. And this is a planted she oak that the landowner just planted in their tree. 6 years until it was like this and the glossies were feeding on it, so really, really quick. So you can basically replant, they grow really quickly and the glossies will feed on them within 5 to 10 years. And this is Allocasuarina verticillata, so it's a drooping she oak. We don't get that here, but you can see how big those cones are. They're like, really, really big, so quite different to what we see here. In terms of Queensland or the East Coast, there's so much we don't know. So pretty much most of the research on glossies has happened on Kangaroo Island, and it's a really great place to study them because we know where they occur. There's not that many of them. They're really accessible, really used to humans. Like, it's just a great place to do research. But we don't really know how that translates to glossies on the East Coast. So we know a lot about how they breed on Kangaroo Island. We know, for instance, how well they use nest boxes on Kangaroo Island for breeding. Here, doesn't seem to really be the same kind of thing. They don't seem to use nest boxes as well. We don't really know how they move around the landscape. That's a lot larger than Kangaroo Island. So heaps of knowledge gaps, heaps of research questions, and the Conservancy is trying to start to address some of these now. In terms of nesting, which is my area of research, the main questions we basically have for Queensland is, where do they breed? We don't really know. There's very few nesting records in Queensland. And the ones that we do know of are really just close to people's houses. That's where they spot them. But we don't really know in the national parks where they're nesting. We have no idea really about how well the nests survive. It might be 10% of nests, it might be 70% of nests that actually survive. On Kangaroo Island, it's about 50% of the nests that survive. But every single nest on Kangaroo Island is protected from possums. So possums it's 100% mortality if they don't protect the nest from possums. So every single nest on Kangaroo Island will die if it's not protected from possums. But possums are really, really abundant on the island. We don't think it's as big a problem here, and I've certainly monitored a couple of nests in the last few years. They're not protected by possums and they've survived here. But those are the sorts of things we don't really understand. And of course here we have other predators that they don't have on Kangaroo Island, like carpet pythons and other things that might get in them. So there's some really, really big questions that we'd like to start to address.
Protection of the hollow?
Yeah, yep. So the recovery team down there actually goes and protects them with iron collars on the trees, pruning canopies, sometimes like actually removing the possums. So yeah, pretty intense work for the recovery team, and it takes a lot of time and money for them. But yeah, so they have to do it because that's the only way the population's been able to recover. And even so, it's still only 50% survival. So that's, as Liz was saying, the actual reproductive capacity is really, really slow. And to make a recovery is really, really hard for these birds. So bioacoustics, which is what my research is in, that might not be a term that you've heard before, but basically all bioacoustics is studying wildlife by their sounds. So you might hear the term ecoacoustics or soundscape ecology, and it's all very much the same. For a long time, for about 100 years, biologists have been recording wildlife sounds. But only now do we really have the technology to be able to do that in like a meaningful way for conservation, where we can start to collect lots of data in really informed ways and replace some of the field biologists' work and actually get some better data. Just as an aside, this photo, this is also on Kangaroo Island, you can actually see the leg bands on these two birds. Maybe not so much that one, but this one, the male here. And that was really cool because we were able to go back into the database and have a look at when they were banded. And this female, this is actually her second husband, because the other one might have died or something. So she was a lot older than him, and now they were paired up. So it was pretty cool.
They do generally pair for life, though. So
yeah.
She wouldn't have just ditched him.
No, he's probably died.
Probably died.
Yeah, who knows? It's really interesting. So just a bit more background on bioacoustics. So like I said, it's becoming really popular for monitoring wildlife. And really, it's the main thing that we use it for is to find rare species or cryptic species. Obviously, they have to be vocal. They have to make sound for us to be able to find them. But that's the main kind of application to conservation. In terms of invasiveness, like the real benefit of it is that it is non-invasive. So really, I can just go out there, stick a sound recorder out and walk away, and it'll collect data. Never have to even see the animal, and we can collect, we can know who's there by the sounds that they're making. Many studies have looked at how cost effective it is, and it does seem to be, for many species, more cost effective than sending people out into the field. With conservation, that's really important because we often don't have a lot of money. So we have the potential to collect basically lots and lots of data. Behaviour is basically the space that I work in, so really looking at how the sounds relate to very specific behaviours. So I'll go through those for glossies. But if you think about animals' vocalisations, they really mean something. They're not just like a bird squawks and it's just a squawk. It's like, no, that bird did that squawk for a reason, and it'll do a different squawk for a different reason. And there's a lot of, particularly in mammals mostly, like elephants and whales and stuff, there's a lot of knowledge about what all their sounds mean. And we're just starting to kind of get into that space with birds. And parrots and cockatoos are really interesting because they're so intelligent and they have so many different vocalizations that you can really start to piece together all the different parts of their biology and movement and ecology and demography and all this cool stuff. So this is basically what I look at every single day of my life. So this is a spectrogram. So you'll see a few photos of these in this talk. So basically along the bottom is time. So you can just think of this as like a picture of time. And up on the y-axis is frequency, which is basically like the pitch of the sound. So in here you can see, so bats, which call in the ultrasonic kind of range, so often like we can't even hear them, they're really high-pitched sounds, so beyond the range of human hearing often. Insects are pretty high frequency as well. Then you kind of get your birds and your mammals down here. And so we call that acoustic niche partitioning, so basically different animals call it different frequencies, and that's really cool. So you can kind of see how healthy a soundscape is by the diversity of sounds that occur there. As a soundscape kind of degrades, as a habitat degrades, you'll often see a lot of these groups of animals just drop off. And it's a really cool way to just like monitor things. You can also do these super fancy spectrograms, which this is actually 24 hours along the bottom here. So you can actually like stick all of this sound together and just really quickly see what's going on in a soundscape. So really cool. This is all very new, like published in the last sort of 10 years. So lots and lots of cool stuff happening in this space.
Can I ask what software you'd be looking at?
So this one, that to me looks like that's just an Adobe software, so Adobe Audition. I use Raven Pro personally, but there's a few out there. Audacity is a free one that you can just download. That's pretty good. Raven Pro is a bit better for analysis. But if you have Adobe software, the spectrograms are really cool. And then this here is a custom built one by my colleagues at QUT actually. So when I started this project 4 years ago, obviously I wanted to know what do we know about the sounds that glossies already make? And there wasn't a lot known, particularly with regards to nesting, which is what I was mostly interested in. But this guy, John Pepper, back in the 90s, he did his PhD on Kangaroo Island and did describe 8 different calls from adult glossies. And this is a nest named in his honour. So that's the Pepper nest, which was one of the ones that I monitored in my study. But in terms of nesting, all we knew was that females beg, so you can often hear them begging. And sometimes they call when they enter the nest. So that was all we knew. But that wasn't formally described. It was just sort of like an anecdote that he mentioned in his thesis. So what I really wanted to know was, what sounds do the nestlings make, so the chicks, if any? Do they make any sound at all? And what sounds happen at fledging? So fledging, like the moment that the chick flies away from the nest, is there something special about that we could actually monitor nesting success with sound? So this is pretty much my life for the last 4 years, basically going to nests, finding nests, sticking sound recorders on nests, leaving them there for 4 months or whatever the breeding season, whatever stage we were at in the breeding season, record for 3 hours a day, and then sit there with my camera and my microphones, filming them and just describing all the behaviours and the sounds and coming up with like a full catalogue of their language, like the full vocal repertoire, we would say. Lots of analysis of sound files. So that took me a long time. There's a lot in that, but it kind of, this is sort of like a real summary version of it. This nestling here that you can see, so that's actually one very, very close to fledging. That one was called Kelly. So she was a little female. And you can see she's kind of lost all her downy feathers. So she's just got like the spots on the breast and on the face, and she survived. So that was great. That was one of the very first nests I ever monitored. Okay, so I basically found that there was, not sure exactly how many vocalizations because they're kind of graded variations of each other, but there's at least 6 distinct contexts in which they give vocalizations, and you can pretty much understand what's going on by knowing what those are. So I'll play you the main ones that you might hear if you have nests around. So what we heard on the video before, the flight calls. I hope this works. Yeah, so you'll obviously hear that a lot. That's the main sound you would hear of glossies if you just had them on your property. In terms of nesting, you hear that every single day as the males, particularly the males, will fly back to the nest. They'll give that sound and alert the female that he's coming in to feed her. As Liz said, the male has the full responsibility of feeding her. So you hear that quite a lot. The other sounds that we hear, just these perch calls, there's quite a lot of different perch calls, but they're all really, really soft. They also give these sounds when they're feeding. So sometimes you'll just hear these really, really faint sounds and you can kind of know that they're there. It's probably going to be too soft for this, but see if you can hear them. So that's just really, really soft, just close contact call, just to say, hey, I'm still here, and if the female's in the hollow feeding the nestling, the male will often just sit nearby and just give that call, just really soft. Don't want to alert any predators, but just, I'm here. That's kind of the context. The other sound that we hear a lot at nests is the display call. So this is the courtship call. So the male, even though they pair for life, they still have to kind of maintain their pair bond. And so the male will give this sound, which is very, very specific and unique. It doesn't occur in any other circumstance. And it has a physical display as well. So the male will bob his head while he does it, and then he'll turn his body and fling his tail feathers to the female, so to flash his red tail feathers. And that always happens before copulation, but most of the time, 99% of the time, the female will try and attack him when he does it. She's just get away. She just bites him, and it's pretty funny. But you can, and he'll be persistent. He'll do this for an hour and just keep flashing. And even though she's already nested, she's got a chick, it's what are you doing? But he'll keep doing it. So have a listen. So it's just that, it's very repetitive. And then another very common sound is the female begging call. So this is very loud, very persistent, and you'll hear this a lot around nests because she has to beg him for food. And the really interesting thing about the begging calls, which I came to notice as I was looking at lots of these spectrograms, you can even see here that each call looks a bit different. And I started noticing that between the females, they looked very, very different. So this is definitely the most variable call. And I've just had an honours student look at this in detail, and we've actually found that the females vary in their reproductive ability based on this, which makes sense because this is what she uses to get food from the male. So some of them are just better at begging. So that's really interesting. And then, like I said, what I really wanted to know was what sounds do the nestlings make, which is this call here, which sounds very, very similar to the call that the females make when she goes into the nest hollow. So these two calls are your best indicators of nesting. And if you're looking for nests, this is basically what you'll listen for. So all the other calls you might kind of hear in other contexts, like I said, feeding, just flight calls, but this is what you will hear at active nests, and they're dead giveaways normally that there's a nest in the area. So, and they sound very, very similar. So the female's nest call and the nestling, so they're quite similar. They're quite loud and they're really harsh and that like grating kind of sound, which is what glossies are known for. And like I said before, there's many different subtypes, many different contexts. So there's, quite a large variety of different calls that they give. And once you start to understand all of these call types and you kind of listen to them long enough and looked at enough spectrograms, you can actually start to understand sort of what's going on between all the different birds and often other members of the flock as well. So it's not just the birds that are nesting, but all the other birds that are coming along. So like in this example spectrogram, you can kind of see the male's perch call, then the female flight call, the male responds, and the nestling calls, and the female goes in the nest, and the nestling call, like you can actually start to understand what's going on. And this is without me ever being there. At a couple of nests, we had just some camera traps as well, just to kind of verify what we were seeing. And that's pretty cool. You can see here the female feeding the nestling. And I just wanted to play this video. So like I said, I really wanted to know what vocalizations, or if there were any particular vocalizations that happened at fledging. And to figure that out, obviously I had to witness fledging, which is very, very hard to do. I think there was like one person who recorded that they'd seen it before. I was super persistent with nests where there was large chicks. I just went to them every single day and just sat there and was like waiting for the moment that it happened. And I was lucky enough to see it about 4 times on Kangaroo Island. And this is the best video that I got. So I'll play this for you, just for context. So this is the nest hollow here. The parents are like up in the tree. They've just flown in, they've gone for a drink in the afternoon, they've come back, they're just vocalizing with the chick. And it's, just getting ready to go. It's flapping its wings. It's, been doing this for days. And I'm like, is it going to happen today? And then this is what happened.
Scary.
Yeah.
It's looking scared. It's very similar to
And my camera skills are like, oh no! And there you can see all 3 of them flying away. Yeah, so that was really, really cool. Sad story though, that nest has now been burnt and doesn't exist anymore. But that's cool. It fledged every single year that I monitored it, so it was a really good nest. All right, so back to bioacoustics. Basically, this is the question I get from most people. I've collected all these sound files, now what do I do with them? And that's a very good question because you just end up with terabytes of sound on your hard drives and you're like, how do I interpret that? What does it all mean? And there's so many layers to dealing with sound data, so I won't go into kind of all of that. But basically, these are the 2 kind of main things that I like to kind of talk about. One of them is like keeping a call library. So I use this platform, it's called EcoSounds, ecosounds.org, which is run by QUT in Brisbane. And I've got all of the glossy calls catalogued in this library. So you can kind of see here, there's these green, I don't know if you can see that, it's a bit faint, but there's these green boxes where I've gone and tagged this. I've said this is a Glossy Black Cockatoo. It gives me all my information, so like the site, the date, etc. And I've got the full reference library there now, so all 20 vocalizations are catalogued there. And then the other thing that I do in my research is look into automation. So sounds like it should be really easy to automate the processing of this stuff, but it's not. It's actually really, really hard. So people often ask me, is there just like Siri for birds? Like, can we just whip out our iPhone and, It's not quite there yet. I wish it was there, but it's not quite there yet. In my research, I have built a couple of like algorithms to do this, but precision or the accuracy of it is still pretty low. You still have to go through and verify every single detection. It is getting better though, and I'm since on sort of like version 10 of the call recognizers that I use, and they are getting a lot better. But I should go back. So this spectrogram here, the blue boxes are the recognizer actually detecting the calls, which is really good, but you often get this as well. So this is all wind noise, and it will get confused, and then it'll just send me to wind. Glossies and all cockatoos, so same with the red-tailed black cockatoos that I work on, they're pretty good species to do this kind of work on because they tend to be quite loud and tend to be quite different from other animals in the soundscape. I also do some work on a couple of other birds. The worst one for this would be the plains wanderer, which they use, so a bird out in the desert, tiny little bird out in the desert. They use sound recorders to find them, and they call like down in this range. So any wind, it's just completely gone. So I spend 99% of the vocalizations that the recognizer detects are wind. Cockatoos is like 50-50. And just wrapping up, so in terms of like, if you were ever interested in getting involved in this space, there's many different recorders out there on the market. So these are song meters. These would have been, they're like really the originals and the best on the market. They're also the most expensive, but they have the greatest functionalities, very, very like excellent sound quality, really great customer service, like just the whole package, but you're looking at $2,000 a pop. For my research, I used these recorders here. So these were actually by a Brisbane company called Frontier Labs. They're about $1,000, probably a bit more when you add the batteries and SD cards. Really excellent quality, and they never once failed me, but still quite expensive. The Conservancy helped me buy a couple, then I had to, could only buy about 20 with the budget that I had. Now on the market, we've got these guys. These are pretty new, so they're the audio moths. They're about $50 plus batteries and SD cards, and they're completely revolutionizing bioacoustic monitoring. Yeah?
So how far away is the calls?
Great question. So with these ones, and the Frontier Labs, so these guys are much more sensitive, much higher quality. The exact distance depends on the environment that they're in. But a good rule of thumb is sort of like if you could hear it, the recorder will hear it. Audio moths, because they don't have an external microphone, it's a lot smaller. So their detection space is a lot smaller.
So it would have to be on like the nesting tree?
Pretty much, or nearby. Yeah, pretty much. But because they're so much cheaper, you can buy many more, and you can actually have actually probably better coverage of the landscape. But they really are quite amazing. We've just purchased 60 of them for red-tailed black cockatoo work in Victoria, and we've just gone through the first season of using them. And pretty cool. Like the data is, for a $50 machine, whereas I was spending $1,000 on these. I was like quite impressed. And just to wrap up, sound can tell us a lot. There's a lot of data that we can collect from sound files. Of course, basically what we want to know is where are they and what are they doing? And this is a cute nestling that we were banding. This one's about 6 weeks old, and it's so cute. Oh, thanks.